This is part 4 of the KhoodeelaarTV television channel, broadcast on the internet, not on satellite, not on terrestrial, not on cable platforms. This is under the banner of the BabyAngelGeronimo, the world's bestest witness to the depravity and the corruption, the cruelty, and the incompetence exposed in the behavior of the so-called government in the UK, government agencies, as the depraved DEFRA agency has been exposed as being the most grotesque perpetrator of depravity. Government agencies in the UK are unaccountable, undemocratic, unethical, lacking in compassion and lacking in basic, universally understood and defined competence that should be present in any government department, publicly funded in the name of serving the society. Of course, there is no such thing as society. As Margaret Thatcher, condemned as the witch, had boasted, and in the last few days of her so-called competition against Rishi Sunak to be slotted in as leader of the Conservative Party, LieZ Truss frenetically used insinuations and suggestions that she was the new Margaret Thatcher. She obviously based that on the assumption that most of the Conservative Party voters, Little Englanders, were too stupid to understand that Margaret Thatcher and LieZ Truss were two very different individuals. And LieZ Truss might fantasize that she was another Thatcher, meaning that she was going to get the benefit of being known as Thatcher was known, many things, including the Iron Lady, including the phrase that was not hers anyway, the phrase that she allegedly used, the lady is not for turning. Everything that Thatcher did in terms of policy, everything she did in terms of making statements while being in post as Prime Minister was the wrong thing at the time, but because of the propaganda machine employed to suppress the inherent contradictions, weaknesses, and corruption in her policies, the ordinary people were not given the facts and were not able to act on the facts. So she appeared to be enjoying the approval of the Little Englanders. But then there were serious crises plaguing her regime, which could not be salvaged, and Thatcher could not be saved in terms of her hanging on to the post as leader of the Conservative Party or the incumbent as Prime Minister. Internal dissension was so high and persistent that serial meetings took place by individual conservatives asking her to resign. And so she resigned. Anyone who was around at the time when Thatcher resigned over 33 years ago would have known that Thatcher was not a role model. And yet, the fact that LieZ Truss thought that Thatcher was a role model and that kind of comparison by her with Thatcher would enhance her claim to be the better candidate as compared to Rishi Sunak. Whatever the reason for her getting the numbers that Rishi Sunak didn't get, and however corrupt the accounting and whatever other lobbying, internal processing or procedural fraud was or were applied is not known so far, but it will be known in due course. In the meantime, today, Sunday, the 2nd of October 2022, LieZ Truss has been in Birmingham, in the English Midlands, where their annual jamboree, so-called annual conference, party conference, begins this weekend. And there are already clear, unambiguous expressions of opinion by very notorious right-wing conservatives in the Conservative Party, in Parliament, in the House of Commons especially, which opinions totally oppose her and condemn her. I mean, for someone like Nadine Dorries to tweet against LieZ Truss about Truss totally destroying all credibility, if there were any credibility, of Crazy Kwarteng, aka the Chancellor of the Exchequer, that is the UK Finance Minister, was a crazy thing itself. For Nadine Dorries to say words to that effect in the tweet, as reported by the BBC, just completes the scenario, which was outlined in the Times yesterday, that is Friday, somebody saying words to the effect that LieZ Truss would not last as leader of the Conservatives, as the Prime Minister, until Christmas 2022. Now, this is October 2022, November 2022, and Christmas, so it's just under 3 months from now. And it looks that LieZ Truss, although she has remained apparently committed to her stupid tax cut adventurism, it is quite clear from her body language and her choice of words and phrases that she knows that the game is up, the gig is up. Remember Baker, the junior Baker, conservative Brexiteer, super Brexiteer member of parliament, who made a very brief spiel in the House of Commons and condemned Boris Johnson and said that the gig was up or the gig was finished. The gig was the central word that Baker used. And I'm using that as a paraphrase in the commentary, and to say that LieZ Truss In my opinion, my observation, as I said previously, LieZ Truss was a lightweight right from the start. And Crazy Kwarteng was even lighter. How bad has the Conservative Party degenerated? How badly has it degenerated? I mean, to have two absolute misfits in terms of the administration of a government. I mean, you couldn't get worse. I mean, LieZ Truss was looking, maybe there had been some camera effects as well and technology, looking like she was glowing in fulfillment. But after 48 hours of the critical light being cast on her, not only on television but also on radio, by quite a few local radio stations that had guests quizzing her, LieZ Truss looks really deflated. This is what time is it now? This is 17:28 hours GMT on Sunday, the 2nd of October 2022. And all the images that are being accessible at this time via the internet show the consistent body language and the consistent image of a deflated LieZ Truss. Although she has begun to rewrite some of these stupid scripts, saying that she did make mistakes, which is completely at odds with her reiteration that she would continue with the adventure of cutting taxes for the richest. Although she has done that, it is not going to save her in the conservative camp. That is where the decisions about whether she stays as leader of the Conservatives and consequently as Prime Minister, the decisions are being made as to how soon she should be ditched. There is no way that her so called rewriting of the scripts will save her. The damage has been so devastating, so comprehensive, that it has upset every single main pillar on which the conservative facade has stood. The biggest pillar being the fraudulent message that the conservatives are better at running the economy. Well, that is the facade, but that is a facade that has been given the equivalent treatment of being real when it came to the Little Englanders and the majority of the Conservative Party voters. That is absolutely without any shadow of a doubt that she is done for. She's done for, and when she's done for as the leader of the Conservative Party and the leader of the kind of government, she's also done for in terms of finishing crazy Kwarteng. And Kwarteng is a political corpse that she is having to drag out of the stage and into the oblivion that he belongs in. I mean, the point cannot be made too strongly, but it has to be made. People have said as if in mitigation, that crazy Kwarteng, unlike the appearance from his failures and disastrous policies, is quite intelligent. as they say, as attested to by the fact that he has got a quote PhD and that he has got first class degrees and that he also went to Harvard. Now, why do people refer to these places? Cambridge, Harvard. I mean, what do these references suggest about their relevance, about the attendees' relevance? When the actual truth is being told about Barack Obama, for example, who went to Harvard, as well as Michelle Obama, but Michelle we shall put aside for the time being. Barack Obama will be written about as one of the most accomplished liars and cheats and frauds. Well, he is as dishonest as Donald Trump. The only difference is that Trump's dishonesty was on display from the word go, whereas Obama hit the main stage by pretending, by stealing other people's stuff when he started the campaign for the White House. I noticed that he was lying, and I never stopped noticing that he was lying, including the sick-making photo opportunity that he took part in with Hillary Clinton when they staged a series of televised antiques showing how they were enjoying the murder of Osama bin Laden. Again, the truth about Osama bin Laden and how he was, the various stages that were followed before he was murdered, will not be known for quite some time. But it is very clear, will not be known officially, that is. But it's quite clear that Osama bin Laden, at every stage of his presentation as the leader of a terrorist organization and of Al Qaeda and all the other things, everything has been a misstatement, because bin Laden himself was very close to George W. Bush and his family. Now, this has to be a very difficult thing to untangle. How was it that bin Laden became the leader of a terrorist organization from wherever it was? And my observation of all these terrorist events consistently shows that these are all staged. But before going any further, I must say that I firmly believe that there is no room in Islam for anything that can be remotely described as terrorism. That is to say, harming and doing any damage to innocent people, vulnerable people. Secondly, terrorizing selected targets, any number of individuals in any corner of any country, is the stupidest military thing that can be done. No terrorism of that description has changed anything, really. That is my observation as well. And most terrorists, including the SLA of the 1970s, the Symbionese Liberation Army, showed its own stupidity. I mean, the Petty Hearst was completely groomed and was sleeping with the terrorists and became one of their spokespersons. So that was beyond a joke, because the whole propaganda about the Symbionese Liberation Army was based on the innocent white kind of heiress being kidnapped and all the rest of it. Absolute rubbish. And other terrorists, so called, or other brands of terrorism, what do? They don't achieve anything. They don't achieve anything physically, and they don't achieve anything morally. They cannot do that. I mean, moral high ground is a complete opposite to terrorism. And yet, terrorism and terrorist activities remain at the top of the agenda for the likes of Barack Obama and others of his corrupt ilk. They want to rely on the presence, forever presence of the terrorists. Why do they do that? Because they need terrorists, which logically vindicates my thesis that terrorists are not independent moral agents on behalf of the oppressed people of the world, of whatever description. The terrorists are devised and created by the so-called target states. So we shall be talking about all of those in due course more, of course. Now, back to the self-styled Margaret Thatcher clone, LieZ Truss. She's already done for, as I said, and she's not going to be kind of revived in political terms, because even the 2008 banks collapse and the other similar disasters economically in the capitalist sphere did not do the damage that has been done in the 24 hours of LieZ Truss and crazy Kwarteng. I mean, it is absolutely unacceptable for these two morons to be in the post that they are, and they have been put in. That shows the other collapse, that is the built-in collapse of things British, let's say. There is no real constitution in Britain, and so therefore these two clowns could be put in the posts of Prime Minister and the Finance Minister without any check, without any balance. That is exactly what has happened. A proper constitution, as defined objectively, is a constitution that provides for transparent and manifest checks and balances against abuse and misuse of power. Now, these two, crazy Kwarteng and LieZ Truss, have been all over the place, and they most certainly have not shown any intellect. And Michael Gove is a very opportunistic individual who has served his careers by sucking up to Rupert Murdoch. Most of the times he was given a platform by Murdoch as a senior Times name. And then when Donald Trump got in at the White House, Dirty Digger Murdoch played the strings, and he stayed off camera while he allowed the clown Michael Gove to appear to be quizzing the just installed Donald Trump. That was a transparently stupid interview, no matter how it was sold, that is promoted. And if Michael Gove was a moral individual, he would not have done that. But he's not a moral individual. He's a selfish careerist, petty careerist individual who would do anything at the bidding of Dirty Digger Murdoch, because Murdoch for some years harbored the thought or the plot that he would be able to install Michael Gove as the leader of the Conservatives and then as the Prime Minister of the UK. Murdoch didn't care about the morality, about the society or anything. All Murdoch cared about, and he is still caring about, is how he could use, control the incumbent in the office of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Remember, I have said originally, it has not been said by anyone else originally, that the main source of Rupert Murdoch's quote wealth is the Sun newspaper, which you call scum. Because for decades, the scum was the stable main first stop for most of the brainwashed little Englanders who went for page 3 and committed the act in broad daylight of consuming page 3. And they would do anything to support the kind of brand. And for many, many years, too long, this scum prevailed as the newspaper, as the title so called, with the highest circulation, highest number of readers. This was the source, and Rupert Murdoch made billions from the little Englanders, from this scum. But in return, Rupert Murdoch has not reciprocated the kind of hospitality that the UK government machines gave him. He didn't pay the taxes to the extent that he owed the taxes. He did pay, but he didn't pay anywhere near the extent to which he owed and still owes taxes to the British public, to British society. And as the revelations, although they were not complete revelations, but as the revelations by his mistress, Rebecca Brooks, his real mistress is Rebecca Brooks. I mean, it's obscene and sick, but he has treated her as the woman with the highest secrets and mysteries. Now, Rebecca Brooks is a shallow, dishonest individual, and she really has been Murdoch Small, as gangster Small. As Rebecca Brooks was forced to confess in the public hearings that she took part in, she was compelled to take part in during the Levison so-called inquiry. All the prime ministers, Cameron, and before him, Blair, were, behaving as her poodles. Think about that. And Tony Blair bowed to Rebecca Brooks as Murdoch's mistress. Cameron bowed to her as Murdoch's mistress. And the reason why they bowed to her was simple, as the scum boasted. Because it's the scum that done it. One scum said that it done the proper difference. They made the difference in terms of Tony Blair getting the votes. It was very serious claim, and it was true. Because most of the Little Englanders that consume, literally consume, and financially consume the scum, literally consume because of page 3 and the sub pornographic content, which was the main reason why they bought it and kept it at the top level of circulation. These people, the Little Englanders, never had any brains, as Donald Trump boasted in the 1980s in a kind of private conversational statement. To him, the American Republicans were the most stupid people in the whole country, and that the Republicans voters could be manipulated to do anything, which has turned out to be absolutely true. So the equivalent stupidity is and has been present in the Little Englanders, who have been making Rupert Murdoch the world's biggest media owner. Murdoch is a fraudster, but because the British media, the other parts of the British media, is timid and morally compromised itself, that is the rest of it, there has been no investigation of Murdoch. There is absolutely has been no investigation into Rupert Murdoch's taking over of the entire state in the UK. When the Guptas, the Punjabi born Guptas, arrived in South Africa and began their project to take over the whole state apparatus in South Africa, they targeted the likes of Jacob Zuma and they took over the whole state. This is what Murdoch has done in Britain. But unlike the Guptas, who have been identified and whose thuggery and robbery has been exposed, although not conclusively, and despite the fact that their thuggery and robbery has been exposed, Jacob Zuma still remains quite free. He has not been held to account. And all these hungry, starving people, black people in so-called free South Africa, have yet to be able to taste the freedom that they were supposedly promised after apartheid. In the UK, because the entire media, including the BBC, the media is intimidated and devoid of investigative pursuits of the likes of murder, because the only exception was when this Millie Dowler thing happened and led to the panic behavior by Cameron, who appointed Levison inquiry. That was a very, very significant exception, because Millie Dowler, as a child, young girl, had so much emotional factors around her to make the public outraged about what was done to her by the murderer, by the rapist. So Millie Dowler's phone, it wasn't her violence, her murder and her abuse. It was her telephone being hacked. Just notice the artificiality of even that. Her telephone being hacked that led to the Levison inquiry. And the Levison inquiry, of course, led to Murdoch staging that stunt by saying he was going to shut down the news of this cruise. Apparently, the main outlet that used or sought to use the private messages and contents of Millie Dowler's telephone. And the extrapolation of that set of hacking, the extrapolation is still being kind of felt. And most of the criminals perpetrating the phone hacking and spying and whatever have remained unprosecuted. And even the likes of Private Lie and the midget Ian Pissoff have shown their criminal immorality when they have been persistently attacking Levison. Because Levison really didn't threaten independence of the so-called independence of the press. Levison did not violate anything that should not have been violated about the modus operandi of the individual so-called journalists in Fleet Street and elsewhere. What Levison did and what upsets the likes of Ian Pissoff is that a source other than the Street of Shame and the Private Lie had the audacity to morally pass any judgment about the behavior of the journalists. Now, Private Lie, unlike the ones that preceded Ian Pissoff taking over the post, mainly due to Richard Ingram's being manipulated by Ian Pissoff to succeed Richard Ingram's. Unlike Richard Ingram's, Pissoff has actually taken the exploitation of the private eye in blackmailing various sources and parties and whatever in Fleet Street and in the media. Unlike Richard Ingram's, Pissoff has become a millionaire many times over. And Pissoff has been paid the millions under the pretext of the program Have I Got News for You. It is confected as a corrupt outfit. It is recorded corruptly, dishonestly, and it's not very brilliant. It's not very clever. But it doesn't matter because there is nobody else holding it to account or exposing it regularly. So each episode of the Have I Got News for You, for each episode that Ian Pissoff takes part in, and Paul Martin, each of them is paid £20,000. Think about that. So each of the lying sessions that they take part in for every edition, these two liars are paid £20,000. Now, Paul Martin is the kind of stooge in the package. Because without the stooge, Ian Pissoff would not be able to survive as the so-called team captain. Now, how the hell are two people called a team? And one of them is the captain. Ian Pissoff is not the captain. Ian Pissoff is a liar through and through, and a racist liar as well. But we shall talk about racism or private lie again another time. So in the media, LieZ Truss was not criticized sufficiently during the last days of this so-called kind of contest against Rishi Sunak. But she is now, because all the economic indicators within quotation marks that keep the various facades going, all the indicators show that without the myth that the Conservatives are competent economically, and the British economy is reliable, there will be genuine riots in the streets of Britain. That is the bottom line. The riots began when Thatcher introduced the poll tax in 1990. And when the riots took place in Trafalgar Square, the scale and the ferocity of the riot was nothing on that day as compared with what it would be if Thatcher had not put an end to her suicidal poll tax idiocy. And that showed actually that Thatcher was economically stupider, because this poll tax idea was the product of the brains of another midget, Oliver Let Down. Oliver Let Down was the idiot that came up with the idea of the poll tax. But the poll tax was not totally withdrawn. Council tax and other things that were introduced as sneaky replacements of the poll tax have been unfair and are unfair and are instruments for keeping the poorest people in poverty and keeping the disadvantage of the low income groups and individuals perpetrated throughout the decades since the 1990s. And the Labour Party, so-called as a so-called opposition, has not provided an answer. In fact, as everyone knows, Tony Blair wore the Labour Party name, but he was a conservative of the worst kind. So much so that the most dishonest conservative on the record, Boris Johnson, kept praising up to the last days of his kind of tenancy, kept praising Tony Blair as a model. And Tony Blair's son is almost a billionaire. Now, come on. Where is the investigation? How on earth could Tony Blair's son become a near billionaire? Where is the report? Where are the investigative reports? So we shall be talking about all of these, and we're ending this one by saying that LieZ Truss is having a very, very bad conference. She shouldn't have any other way. She should be sunk at this so-called conference, and she should not survive another month. But she may survive because of the imperfections and the lack of actual scrutiny by the opposition MPs and also by the so-called rest of the media. We shall continue in due course. This is 1800 hours GMT on Sunday, the 2nd of October 2022.